When I was 21 years old, I was in a brutal car crash that almost took my life and changed my life forever. I was driving on a highway back to my hometown with my fiance at the time. We had recently just gotten engaged. It was her birthday the very next day, and we were going to go celebrate both those things with both our friends and her family. And that was when everything went black. Moments before this, there was another driver in the opposite lane as mine, and he was driving about 160 kilometers an hour, completely reckless. He ended up passing a truck driver, and as he passed that truck driver, the truck driver had muttered to himself, "This guy's gonna kill someone." Shortly after this, myself and this driver ended up meeting at a bend in the highway, and he had crossed the center line and hit me head on. The truck driver right after had also approached this bend in the highway and slammed on his brakes, but because he had air brakes, he could barely stop, but stopped just in time. And as soon as he jumps out of his truck, boom, my truck bursts into flames. He immediately jumps down from his truck, starts walking towards my vehicle, but he was intercepted by the driver of the car that hit me. He tried to roll him over, thinking he might be still alive, and as soon as he rolled him over, he noticed his face was missing. So he just instinctively continued on to my truck. The first person he tried to get a response from was my fiance. My fiance was dead on impact, cut in half at the torso with the dash, and was burning in my truck. He had ended up continuing on to the car in the ditch that was rolled over, totally bypassing my side. He noticed in the car in the ditch that there's another person that's ragdolled dead in the back seat of this car. At this point, he didn't really see anybody else, and he calls 911. There's more bystanders now collecting outside. I'm still in my truck. My cab's filled with smoke. I'm unconscious, and I'm also on fire. I did eventually come to this distorted, hazy consciousness. I had no idea where I was. I didn't feel any pain, but I was sitting there with a broken femur, broken in 3 places, that broke outside my leg. I had a ruptured colon from the restraint of the seatbelt, collapsed lungs, fractured spine, and I'm also on fire, getting severely burned. At this point, I just instinctively reached for my seatbelt, still not piecing together that I'm in a vehicle, and I unclip it, and then I end up reaching for the door handle to open the door. All I felt was, I'm warm, I'm uncomfortable, and I need to get out of here. I blacked out at this point. Nobody was facing my vehicle except for one lady, and she let out this horror movie scream while she watched me hop out of the truck looking like a zombie. I'm hopping on one leg, I'm on fire. I hopped across the highway to the ditch, and I rolled myself out. I eventually come to another hazy consciousness, and now I have an emergency response team hovering over me, and they're asking me a bunch of questions. I don't have answers, but I did ask them, where am I? And that was when one of them said, you were in a really bad accident, buddy. I'm now trying to piece together, okay, well, what did happen? If I was in this accident, where was I? Was I back home? Was I heading home from work? And that's when they start pulling out this stretcher, telling me they're gonna end up strapping me to the board. They're constantly talking to me, trying to make sure that they keep me conscious. And they do tell me that there is a helicopter that is going to be coming here shortly. As this happens, I go unconscious again. Then when I come back to consciousness again, I can hear the helicopters here. It sounds like this faint fan in the distance. Everything is so distorted. I feel totally like I'm in a dream. And they told me that they're gonna count down and lift me up on the helicopter, but before they did that, it clicked. I was heading back to my hometown, I was with my fiance. They counted down 3, 2, 1, lifted me off the ground, carried me over to the helicopter. They slide me onto the floor and everything goes black again. I was told later on that I had a 10% chance of making that helicopter ride with the risk of sepsis from my ruptured colon, as well as how severe the burns were on me. I was put into a 3-day drug-induced coma as there was major surgeries that had to be done right away. I eventually woke up from my coma and it was just like a movie. Everything was super fuzzy as I was trying to regain my vision. And I was looking at the end of my bed and I saw this blurry silhouette of 2 people. And after I did regain my vision, I noticed it's my parents. And I don't think they were expecting me to ask the question, the very first question that I asked them. And that was, "Where's Renee?" And that was when my dad looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Jess, but she didn't make it." And that's when all the other questions came, like, didn't make what? Where am I? What are all these tubes hooked up to me? I still had several surgeries and many things to monitor while I was in there. There was a lot of physical pain I had to endure. I had no skin on me on 33% of my body for a couple weeks as I was waiting to get skin graft surgery. Then there was still waiting because I had this large burn that was also on my head. And they were waiting to see what they were going to do with that. There was so much time that I spent alone in that hospital room just wishing that I never made it. I wished I'd died like everyone else. As much as it was the physical pain, it was just the fact that I couldn't accept that Renee was gone. I had no closure. They had done her memorial as I was in the hospital still. I just had to go off of what I was being told and that she's no longer here. After a few weeks had passed, I eventually had gained enough strength after some work with my physiotherapist in the hospital to be able to get out of my bed by myself with this walker. And the first thing I wanted to do was go and look at my new appearance. So I walked across the hospital room over to the bathroom and I went to go and look at myself and I was devastated. I just immediately felt this major insecurity. I am permanently disfigured. I don't look normal. And all I could see was literally Freddy Krueger looking back at me. And all these thoughts going through my head, like, how can I look normal again? After many sleepless nights and just suffering, tons of insomnia, discomfort, everything in the hospital, I just so badly wanted to leave. That was the next part, was moving back in with my parents. And for anyone who's been in that situation knows that's not the most fun thing to do. And especially when you're with parents who had almost lost their son. As I was recovering at home, part of the process was needing to stretch my scars as they were healing. And my physiotherapist at the hospital had told me that if I didn't do that, that I would be limited with my range of mobility. So my dad had ended up building this contraption on this pulley system to force stretch these scars. And as they were stretching, it felt like they were going to tear. I was told that it would have been better for my scars to split open while I was stretching them than to be confined and restricted in these super tight scars. I would sit in the basement in my bedroom and I was there alone a lot, many hours, many days, suffering from insomnia, ruminating on everything that was taken away from me, trying to figure out how to manage all these thoughts and spiraling chaos inside my head. Because Renee was not only my fiance at the time, but she was my high school sweetheart. She was my very first relationship. I thought I got so lucky that was someone I was going to spend the rest of my life with the first go. Renee was just the most compassionate, selfless, caring person that I still today consider myself fortunate to have known. She had such a huge influence on me, and even still today, of just how to be a decent person in this world. She also was my first death. And I did not know how to manage that. I've never been through grief. I've never even lost a grandparent before. That made it so difficult for me to accept that I was the one who survived, and brought on immense survivor's guilt for years. I didn't believe that I was the one who was supposed to be here. I truly believed that she would have been better off in this world than me. I just so badly wanted her there as I'm going through the hardest time in my life. But not only was she not there, but I'm in a new city, so I had no friends around. I didn't have anyone around when I really needed some close people in my life. One of the most detrimental parts was the loneliness that I was going through. Just feeling like everything I was going through was by myself, and I was alone to figure this out. And it led me to go to places in public by myself, just to feel like I was a part of something, like I was around people. This is all occurring at the same time that social media was in its infancy. Facebook was only a couple years old, and this was before we all knew the detriments of social media. And I was very much doing what I think a lot of people have eventually learned not to do, and that is compare yourself. I'm now comparing myself to everybody in their early 20s experiencing this new freedom, new relationships, going to festivals, going on trips, and I'm just sitting alone, ruminating, thinking about how much pain I'm in and how I no longer want to be alive. The nights were the worst. The voices in my head were the loudest, and I was just hanging on to anything I could find to keep myself alive. Some of the ways that I just instinctively thought of to try to sort things out in my head is I would sit down, I would just write. I would write out everything I'm feeling, everything I'm experiencing, everything I'm mad at. All I could keep thinking about is what I would do to this guy if he was still alive, and what he had done, what he took away from me, and it always put me into this extreme anger. But I also, in between that, would experience these huge bouts of sadness. When I was experiencing these really low points, I started sneaking alcohol into my room. I started drinking discreetly. I didn't want anyone to know, especially my parents. And this also led into me starting to use my prescription pain pills as a sedative and as an escape. I first started using them as a way to get some sleep, but this eventually spiraled into me using them during the day, using my prescription a lot faster than it was prescribed for, and making a decision to try and find somebody in the city, this new city, who could maybe connect me with some more pills. I just wanted to punch something this night. I was just thinking again about this guy who did this to me and put me in this state. So I started thinking, well, maybe I'll go to a boxing club, or maybe I'll join a martial art or something, but it's 9 o'clock at night, and it wasn't something that I was going to be able to do that day. But I was just so desperately wanting an outlet for this anger. But then I started thinking, there was this recreation center in this new town that I was at that I drove by a couple days before, and I thought maybe it would have a gym in it. I eventually reached this intersection where I was either going to turn right to go and find these pills, or I was going to go straight to this rec center and go to the gym. And I'm so grateful to this day that this literal crossroad I was in my life, that I ended up going straight to the gym. I had no change of clothes, no idea what I was doing. I just lifted as much weight as I could for as long as I could and brought all the relief I needed. I had ended up going to the gym every day for the rest of that year. And it was one of the best things that could have happened in terms of relieving this anger on a daily basis that I had pent up inside. it also established a sense of control when I just felt like everything in my life was out of control. I didn't want any attention to my scars, and that also included not changing in the change room. I would just change in my vehicle before I would even get in there. And also, once I got home, I wore this bandage on my head. I had this huge open wound still on my head, and just the blood pressure from lifting weight ended up saturating this bandage, and I was always self-conscious of if this was going to end up pouring down my neck while I was lifting. But once I got home, the first thing I had to do was take this bandage off and do a whole bandage change, which was incredibly excruciating as every nerve ending was exposed on my open wound. The final surgery was supposed to be the one that ended up covering my scar with the hair that we had stretched out on my scalp. But to my disappointment, it only ended up covering a few inches on my head and creating even more scars with all the staples and incisions that they had to do. Even though it wasn't my intention, going to the gym inevitably did start to change my physique for the better. I started to see a lot of positive changes, and I started focusing on these changes while looking in the mirror more rather than looking at this permanent disfigurement and the burns on me, and started growing some confidence from it for the first time.
I've learned a lot about adversities, trauma, and navigating through all of it. One of the biggest things I've come to understand is that we want meaning to our adversities. It helps in a way to justify going through them, and after years had passed, I realized how unlikely it is to find a reason just by waiting for one someday. So if we want meaning to what's been endured, it's better to create that meaning ourselves, and that's what's going to help us get from a place of being a victim of circumstances to the victor of circumstances.